Hi there, Emily Midgett here with you today on the Pinkfresh Studio YouTube channel, and today I have some watercolor inspiration to share using a little bit different color palette than I normally use. I'm normally drawn to really bright, vibrant colors, but today I thought I would show you how you can use neutrals to kind of tone down your color palette a little bit. So today's project is going to feature the Miss Your Smile stamp set, which was one of the first sets that I illustrated for Pinkfresh, the Ornate Circle die, and the Lots of Love die. So to start, we are going to heat emboss the large image from Miss Your Smile onto some watercolor paper. This is Arches watercolor paper. It's cold press, so there is a little bit of extra texture in there, and I am going to stamp this multiple times using my MISTI just because there is so much detail in the stamp set, and it is such a large image. I want to make sure that all of that detail gets picked up. So I'm using kind of a vintage metallic peach rose gold, light rose gold color embossing powder. And I just love the kind of, it's feminine, but it still is just really lovely and vintage looking, and it's just such a soft alternative to the traditional black or silver or gold. So for today's project, I'm showing you how you can add neutral watercolors to your really bright watercolors. For today's project, I'm going to use a really bright shade of kind of fuchsia purple, and I'm going to mix in kind of a chocolate plummy brown color. And you can see in the middle there, in the middle swatch, how that kind of, it creates almost a vintage version of that really bright, intense kind of fuchsia purple watercolor. So now I'm just mixing the fuchsia with that chocolate brown on my ceramic watercolor palette. I'm creating a lot of paint there just because this is a very large image, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of paint to work with and I don't have to keep mixing and matching. But so I am using my damp paintbrush, and I'm picking up some of that color, adding it towards the center of the flower, and then cleaning my brush, dabbing it on my stamp chamois, and pulling that color out. You can use your neutral shades of watercolor with your really bright shades to create that kind of muted vintage shade, and I think it's just such a great way to get extra mileage out of your watercolors. So you'll see that I am just adding some of that dark concentrated color towards the center of the flower. I'm paying extra attention to the petals that are kind of tucked underneath the top petals, adding a little bit of extra concentration of color in that area because I want to maintain the contrast between the lighter petals up on the top and the darker, more shadowed petals underneath. So now that we've got our first layer of watercolor done on our dahlia, I'm going to add a little bit stronger concentration of the chocolate brown to our purple and brown mixture. And I'm going to go back in with a second layer of color, and I'm going to intensify those shadows on those petals that are tucked underneath. We want to maintain that contrast between the dark petals behind and the light petals up on top. And so to do that, we intensify the amount of color and the concentration of color on those petals that are darker and more hidden. So now what we're going to do, we're going to add color to those kind of apple blossom, cherry blossom blooms up towards the top. And so what I'm doing is I'm using that same kind of plummy chocolate brown color, and I'm adding this intense, vivid, shocking pink color to it. I'm mixing those two colors together. You can see how super, super bright and intense that pink is on the first little swatch that I created. Then when I add in that plummy chocolate brown, it kind of mutes it a little bit. It helps to kind of tone down that really intense, vivid, hot pink. So now we're using that to add color and shading to our cherry blossoms or our apple blossoms. And that chocolate brown that we've added, it helps to just keep that kind of vintage feel that we've got with the peachy metallic embossing powder and the rich kind of plummy purple dahlia. It just helps to keep it from being too bright and vibrant and intense, those top flowers. So I'm adding concentrated color more towards the center of the bloom and in the areas, the petals that are tucked underneath the other petals, the petals on top. And then I clean my paintbrush, dab it on my stamp chamois, and I pull that color out with the tip of my damp paintbrush. Not very much skill required, just a knowledge of knowing how much water on your brush is too much water. Having that damp stamp chamois to my right to dab the color off of, to dab it extra water off of, that is a key tool to have on your watercolor desk. I could not watercolor without my stamp chamois. You can also use a paper towel. I like my stamp chamois because I know that there won't be any fibers or anything getting onto my paintbrush. I know that it won't disintegrate on me. So now that we have finished adding the color and shadows and depth to the floral portion of our image, we're going to work on the foliage. Now, I'm not doing anything spectacularly exciting with the foliage here. It's just a very pretty shade of kind of a muted olive green, goes along nicely with our vintage color palette. And I'm just doing some basic watercoloring, just adding color to those areas and pulling to those leaves and pulling the color out with my clean damp paintbrush. So now we've finished adding all of our details and our little extra areas of shadow and depth to our image. Now we're going to work on the greeting. And we're going to kind of highlight the greeting with the beautiful ornate circle die. I've die cut that from some really pretty coordinating metallic rosy rose gold cardstock. And we're going to die cut the Lots of Love die. Now this is a super intricate die. I'm going to use it, die cut it on some dark plummy purple cardstock, which is really great complement to the kind of muted dark purple of the dahlia, of the large dahlia flower. I have kept both pieces. There is an outside piece and then the words themselves, the die cut words themselves. There are two pieces to this die, and I've die cut them both so that I'm creating a little frame around the edge of my die cut words. I'm reserving the letters, the die cut letters themselves, and I'm going to keep those little center pieces of like the O and the E, the little center areas that help to make those letters really stand out, to make those letters look like letters. And we're going to adhere those on the negative space on the inside of our sentiment frame. So I've made sure to put those off to the side so that they're safe and they're there when I'm ready to use them. I have adhered my frame, my metallic rose gold frame, with some liquid adhesive down over the top of our watercolored flower. And I like that this sentiment allows that watercolored flower to still kind of pop through. You can still see the watercoloring through the sentiment frame. So now here I am, I'm just popping out those little center pieces of the die cut letters and adhering them in the coordinating spot on that frame, on that frame, sentiment frame die cut. So I am just adhering those little center pieces using tiny dabs of adhesive, and I'm using my tweezers, my needle nose tweezers, reverse, I think they're called reverse tweezers, and they are just an incredibly useful tool to have in my craft room. I use them with almost every project. So now I thought that top portion of the card front looked a little bare, so I'm going to use soft lilac and warm buff ink. I'm going to do some very light ink blending up in the top corner do the soft lilac first, and then over the top go with the warm buff. And that warm buff kind of helps to tone down and make that lilac look even more vintage, and it helps to coordinate really beautifully with the color palette of our watercoloring. So now just a few of the iridescent gems from the Pinkfresh store, from the Pinkfresh Essentials line, and we're done. There's not a whole lot of height with this card, but there's so much detail in that stamped image and that really intricate sentiment that you don't need a whole lot of extra height and dimension on this card. We did all the work with the color palette and the intricate sentiment. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you'll try adding some neutral color to your really bright watercoloring. I think it really creates such a beautiful, soft, vintage look. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.